Hello, everybody. How are we doing? Emma Howitt's here, Pure Abodes, and I'm extremely excited to have Nick Garner here with us today. Hey, Nick, how you doing?
I'm very well, Emma. Lovely to see you.
And you too. The reason I'm so excited to have a Nick here with us today is that he is going to be talking all things stamp duty and, more importantly, how to save money or potentially reclaim some money back on stamp duty. So who wouldn't want that, because it is such a hefty part of a property purchase. So if we can have some control of that, or at least knowledge around that, then I think it's really, really key. So yes, I'm excited about that. So if you do have any questions, then do jump on and let me know. So Nick, let's jump straight in, but let's just find out a little bit about you. I know you have done a huge amount of things in your career. It'd be lovely to just, for those people that don't know you, if you could just give a little bit of introduction to yourself.
Okay, I suppose my top fun facts are that I raced internationally in kayak racing and in flat water canoeing for many years, and I've raced in 3 world championships, a World Cup, and as a master, which is over 35, I've raced in 3 events, I think 3-4 events, and I was once upon a time it was a thing, and I lived that dream for a while. I originally come from Ireland, an Anglo-Irish background, so this is where cultural references are more about England. My grandfather was a Royal Naval captain, and on the other side they were business people in Belfast. And anyway, so in terms of business, um, I've done a lot of different things. I'd say overall I'm an entrepreneur above everything, and I'm a great fan of really looking at first principles and then extrapolating from there. And I'd say just broadly, the first principles with me are that whilst various cousins and such had nice formal educations, I grew up in good old Ireland, as I said, and didn't have the benefit of such a good education, but I ended up hustling hard over the years and did reasonably well in property. And I've read lots of books, which helps. So, if you learn to read quickly and you read a lot, then you learn a lot. But anyway, I originally got into internet marketing way back, not way back, but in the 90s, I was canoeing basically and doing what young people do, just kind of hustling. In 2000s, I ended up working I had a building company, early 2000s, and I just had a calling for the internet. I know it sounds strange, but it was this great tide that was building up and building momentum. And running a contracting firm is incredibly stressful and aggravating. If any of you have ever done it, you'll know what I mean. You have to be quite hardcore. Anyway, I just went very deep into the whole internet thing and learned about something called search engine optimization, which is basically decoding what search engines do. And then from there, one can extrapolate and then build hypotheses and then go and enact them. And then ultimately there's a result or a consequence, which in this case is achieving rankings. And I ended up working in the gambling industry. Not very wholesome, but anyway, there is a lot of money where there's money, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And I did reasonably well there, and I had a marketing agency. In 2012, I worked in a company called Betfair, then a company called Unibet, and I set up a marketing agency in 2012, basically standing on top of all of that experience that I gained. And from there, I ended up selling that to as part of an overall sale by a company called ICS to Racing Post. So that was a good outcome
Oh,
in many ways. And then because I'd been in that scene, I ended up founding a online casino. Again, not very wholesome. But the key thread that was running through everything was learning how to build teams, learning about how to sell things and market things and systems and processes. In the meantime, there was this backstory going on around property, and uh, just we got the timing right, and that was just luck as much as anything. But we ended up doing a build around 2015, our own family home, which was a very good financial decision. So it's a 230 square meter, 4 bed, 3 bath house in a prime area in a place called Jared's Cross, which it's just a very nice place, and we did very well with it. But anyway, so eventually after 2019, I sold the casino and did reasonably well with it. We found a niche market. Some other people felt that they could do better than us with what we had, with what we created. And then I just timed out and got into sort of that full time, got into property properly. And I set up a property sourcing business. And in that, the mission was to really understand how property, or how a segment of property works, buy to let, and really just get to the bottom of a big question, which is, how do you pick the best buy to let property? And it's a simple question with a very complex answer. And the answer, by the way, is for me anyway, to look at people first, because property is a people thing, and it's very tied up with aspirations, with the idea that people like people who are like themselves, and therefore if you uh, fall back on demographics and capital growth data and crime data, and you look at all of that in a kind of holistic way, bearing in mind there are thousands of metrics you can use, but there's only a few that really count. Then one can predict which areas are best, which are going to have the best capital gain outcomes, and also which areas did what during various cycles, and whether they're overcooked or not. Anyway, I set up I created 3 courses on Udemy. They're free, and I think I've got about 2,400 students. So, and I think my average rating is 4.8 out of 5. So it's, Emma can share all this later on, but it's there, they're free, and they seem to be quite popular. And really, it's just the embodiment of some of the knowledge that I've got on the topic. Anyhow, it was all going beautifully, as things do. And then September, so we ended up having a niche, and the niche was Hong Kong Chinese buyers. And the reason that works is because we were still are working with an educator, and these people are a long way from here, and they just need help to get this right. And the flavor of sourcing that we have always gone for is the one where we try to help people avoid trouble, because it's very easy to fall into lots of trouble with property if you don't know what you're doing. And so by understanding all the demographics and the capital gain and so on, we're able to identify those properties which are they just work. They're going to attract nice tenants who are going to look after your house. The capital growth is going to be there. It all works. But the market seized up for us in September 22, when Gatehouse Bank, who are the primary lender for this particular cohort, left the market. And then we were just sitting there with what was a lot of business. So I think that year we transacted about 100 properties. So in other words, we sourced 100 properties or so for clients. It was just plowing along beautifully. then it wasn't. And we were left with lots of property and no income. So I came across this stamp duty reclaim thing, and as I do, I started getting into it. I decoded how it worked, and we had lots of cases to experiment on because we had all these clients we'd sourced property for, and we got it right. And then this idea of skill stacking, which is a very important notion, as by bit of luck, a lot of design, I ended up skill stacking in a certain way to produce what we got now. And the skills that have been stacked are a lot of tech knowledge. So in other words, being able to build systems and processes to save time but give a better output. In other words, the cases that we produce, there's quite a lot of tech behind that, actually, a lot of conditional logic and so on. So we got that. There's the legal stuff, and it just so happens that in my family there are lots of lawyers, and I've even got an uncle who's a judge, would you believe, or was retired now. But point is that there's something in my brain which is good with legal stuff, and when you combine that with the power of search engines and tools like ChatGPT or whatever, it's much easier to start getting answers, to dig through the legislation, to understand the source of issues, and then of course corroborating it with friends who are lawyers and what have you, and then pulling together solid case arguments or whatever the objective is. Anyway, the business is going really well, and that's because we're stacking on top of tech, very solid case files, well, extremely solid case files, which I can talk about if you're interested. So this whole idea of HMRC compliant reclaims, which is a whole thing in itself, but I'll talk about that. And then we've got the marketing. So because I spent many years working in search engine optimization, we've put a lot of content on the website, and that's beginning to rank around the internet. And so if you trust Google, and most people do, and you find us, then you trust us. That's the kind of idea. The other thing that we've been really successful with is structuring the team and how that works. So broadly, there are 12 of us in the business now. So the salespeople are me, obviously, and then we've got Lewis and Reese, and we've got another Greer who's coming on board, and they're all based over here. And the way it works is we have all the admin function in Macedonia, and the way that works is that because wages are that much lower there, but the quality of work is really high, and because this is a very admin intensive activity, although we've cut down the admin, the amount of admin in the process because of all the systems we've put together, nevertheless, it means that we can be competitive on our reclaim rates, as it were, and we have meat on the bone, as it were, to do marketing, stronger marketing than other people. So therefore we can get the word out. And I've been writing a book, and it's as anyone who's written a book knows. Yeah, so Emma and I were talking about this the other week, actually. It's always such a mission. So anyway, it's nearly done.
And I think actually, Nick, the mission is more getting it launched than the writing now when I'm comparing it. But anyway, that will soon be done.
Well, there's a beautiful phrase, isn't there? You don't know what you don't know. And since I've never written a book before, I don't know what I'm in for. But I have friends in the world of publishing, so we're going to work on that. But anyway, the book is up to just a touch under 1,000 pages, 220,000 words.
That's amazing.
It's been a huge project. But the point is that instead of going to university to learn about stamp duty, and there is no course doing that topic, I decided to write a book because that way I could get deep into it and really exercise really just going to exercise myself on all the different facets and all the different elements, because they in aggregation there are all sorts of weird use cases that always turn up, and then at least I know my way around it, and it's a thing that one can give away to people.
Amazing, amazing.
Yeah.
Can I
Anyway.
just touch on, there's obviously a lot of successful people out there who, have had successful sporting accolades in their career. I can't admit to being doing anything as amazing as what you're doing, but I certainly got to a reasonably high level, horse riding,
Okay.
and things like that. Do you feel that really gave you, I'm just interested myself, that gave you this kind of grounding to be so very thorough? Because it just seems to me, everything that you've talked about here, you've talked about entrepreneurship, but you've also spoken about, it's extremely thorough, your tech knowledge, the legals, the marketing, the team, all of these kind of stacking up in a skill set. Do you think that came, and originally came from your sporting prowess?
I'd say it originally. Interesting question. So I'm vice commodore of a canoe club in Richmond upon Thames, one of the biggest in the country. I think sort of 450 members, depending on the time of the year. And I see a lot of, and I've been there for a very long time, for 36 years. When I came to England back in 1987, I joined there. And you just see people come and go, and there's definitely people who just have it baked in their brains. They're more motivated, they're more rigorous, and they try harder than the next person. And I think, as you'll know, Emma, if you're going to get good at something, there is every self-help coach person will say the same thing. You just got to put the effort in. It's not really true. You got to put the right effort in. And I know when I look back on my life, I've spent an awful lot of effort on things that didn't work. But then life is kind of an accumulation of knowledge, and yeah, and I think what sport gives you is, or competing gives you, is A, you're comfortable with competing, because a lot of people aren't, and B, you're prepared to just get stuck in and give it your best. And a lot of people aren't. It's not that they don't want to work hard enough. It's just that they're afraid to work hard enough, because if they go all in on something and it's a fail, then they get very upset and they go, oh, the world hates me. But failure is just, it's okay. You just pick up, get on, do the next thing, and on it goes. And as I get older, I'm 50, nearly 57 now, and I reflect on this a lot, and I think endeavor is what keeps. Endeavor is a beautiful thing as long as it's productive, and sport is like an interesting concentration of endeavor, isn't it? Really. Anyway, yeah.
Yeah, no, I like that. And actually, my daughter, she's transpires. We do tetrathlons, which is swimming, running, shooting, and riding. And it transpires that she's pretty good at shooting.
Okay.
She's only 8, but I really want to get her into a competition. She hasn't got to the competition yet, because there can be that real differential, can't there, between people who are exceptionally good at something, but then actually being good at something within a pressurized environment can sometimes make people fall apart. I know one of my sons, very, very, basically a professional biker, but when it comes to the competitions, he doesn't always have that edge. And I think it is, a mindset thing. So, yeah.
It is, absolutely. So the answer, it's a very simple paradigm. It's a very simple situation. So what happens is the best athletes, like this is sports psychology 101, best athletes don't feel the pressure. In other words, they're just oblivious to it. They're in the zone, which means that they're in this beautiful place where everything is flowing and effortless. And this idea of flow, it's a thing. So there's a book there's a guy called his name will come to me. It's got an incredibly long name, but the point about it is that flow is a thing. It's a state of mind, and people who can get into flow and weirdly become slightly delusional, because the delusion is that it really matters, but the flow state says it's just effortless and I'm having fun and here I am. and it's a bit like someone singing on stage in front of 50,000 people. It's they're in a beautiful, happy place, and it's kind of delusional because if they mess up, it's going to be consequential. But learning how to create that delusion in a nice way is a really good thing. So yeah, this is the big thing in life, I think, just to be able to get into flow and think about outcomes rather than good at having good outcomes. So in other words, set yourself a point to where you want to be. So with the stamp duty business, for example, I want to be the person people go to when they need help, and I want our business to be for us collectively to be, yeah, those people who help you get your money back,
Love it,
because
love it.
you pay too much stamp duty, or so many people do. And I did some calculations on it the other day, and it was something like 1.7 billion pounds a year is probably is overpaid in stamp duty, and it was based on some fairly conservative numbers, based on the number of higher properties paying higher rate stamp duty, and then if you assume that, say, 14 to 20% of properties are not habitable technically, uh, yeah, you just do some numbers and it turns into big money, but huge money that I find it hard to comprehend. But anyway,
Amazing.
yeah, sorry.
Well, let's just jump straight into the real sort of nuts and bolts, so to speak. But I know we mentioned this before, but can you explain to people, and especially if they're kind of a bit newer to property, or even just new to the knowledge that inherently solicitors know, as I understand it, about 4 to 5 ways that you might reduce or mitigate your stamp duty. But as I
Yes.
understand it, and certainly last time I looked, I think there's 50 ways, certainly 49 to 50 ways that you can reduce or mitigate your stamp duty. And I think there's, well, as you've said, you're writing a book, and currently it's 250,000 words. I mean, that is a massive book.
I know it's too big, really, but I'm gonna have to chop it up and repurpose it for different people,
put it
for
into different
things.
things. But yeah, would you be able to sort of explain who is responsible for stamp duty, and for who is the one that has to have that knowledge of the stamp duty? Is it your solicitor? Is it us? It would be really great to
Okay,
for you
well,
to feedback on that.
firstly, let's start with, what are you like as a person? So if you're the kind of person that just rolls along and you trust highly paid professionals to get it right for you, and you believe they care about you enough to always do the right thing for you, then you shouldn't bother listening to this anymore, because they got you covered.
I like it.
Yeah. The thing with conveyancing solicitors are they're administrators, and their job is to identify risk, and they they work in a highly regulated environment, and any and they take lots of risk anyway, because they give advice, and if the advice is wrong, then they can be sued potentially. That's all if, but, maybe, potentially, etc. But theoretically, that's the case. And I think a lot of conveyancing solicitors are just nervous about being caught up as being effectively being promoters of bad tax advice. So they'll always say to you, we're not tax accountants. Go talk to a tax accountant if that's what you want to do. But on the whole, they know a few basics, like, that looks like a house. It's a house. It's residential. That's an office. The same. And that's all fine. But the underlying bottom line is that the form that they complete, the SDLT1, well, the bottom line is, it's a self-assessed tax.
Yeah.
So whilst you got a conveyancing solicitor doing it for you, they're doing it on your behalf. So if the conveyancing solicitor messes up, technically they're not responsible, because it's a self-assessed tax and you've agreed to let them act on your behalf to to act as an agent, in effect, to submit your stamp duty form or stamp duty payment. Same with Wales, same with Scotland, all the same. So anyway, the thing, they mess up frequently, and it's because they don't really care, and they are risk averse, so they just do what they think is the most straightforward thing. That's it. So I can tell you about many horror stories with conveyancing solicitors. Would you like to hear a horror story?
Well, yeah, I definitely do. And let me just to clarify that the story I told you, I'm just buying an HMO at the moment. It's quite a decent size one, 9-bed. Anyway, I sent my sales memorandum to 2 conveyancers because I'm a bit uncertain if I wanted to carry on with the one I'm currently using, and they both came back with like massively different amounts of stamp duty that needed to be paid. One was 10 grand and one was 22 grand. And I just thought, my gosh, it's, that is very interesting that just a straightforward comparison like that. But yes, let's hear a horror story.
Okay, so by the way, there are lots of questions about how do I get my stamp duty back.
Yeah,
we can talk about that. Yeah,
we're just about
okay.
to. We'll
Cool.
come back to those. I just wanted to get the kind of basics in, and then we'll come back to those.
So just for laughs, the worst best was a property sold for about 2.2 million, and it had it was near a river, and the part of it was a boatyard, and the other, so split title, so plot A, plot B. Plot A, boatyard, trading business, that's a boatyard, it's a boatyard. And plot B, a house. Anyway, the conveyancing solicitor assessed the whole thing as residential, even though it was mixed use. And so the idea is if a property is mixed use, in other words, commercial and residential, then the whole lot is taxed at non-residential stamp duty rates. But anyway, the solicitor was absolutely adamant about this. So yeah, it's residential. It's residential. And I did some research, and obviously that wasn't the case. But the solicitor keeps protesting his innocence. Anyway, the bottom line is that the amount of money, we're talking about £145,000 difference between residential rates and non-residential rates. Thankfully, it's a straightforward situation to clean up, which I've done. But it's just like, what the hell? Another one, just what other, is a friend of mine has a property. She's doing an HMO, actually. And she wanted to self-assess as non-residential before at completion. And that's a whole topic we can talk about. But anyway, conveyancing solicitor does the SDLT1 form. And she tells the solicitor, right, just make sure it's non-residential for stamp duty purposes. But the solicitor couldn't really understand what that meant. So the solicitor classified it as a house. But then on the other section in the SDLT1, where it talks about not refunds, but stamp duty reliefs, said that the property was actually farmland, because it was the only way the solicitor could reconcile the idea that that thing is a house, but they want it non-residential. So technically, what the solicitor was about to do was say that a 3-bed semi-detached house in Hounslow was farmland, like commercial farmland. And anyway, I got it in time and told the solicitor to do exactly X, Y, and Z, which I've explained in my book, funnily enough. And all was kind of well in the end. But the thing about these kind of mistakes is that HMRC have what they call data trawls. What they do is they look for inconsistencies in the returns, and if they see an inconsistency, then you could trigger as an inquiry, and off you go. And she was walking straight into a lot of aggravation, but so far so good. So there's 9 months in which HMRC have to inquire from date of the submission of the SDLT1 and once that 9 months is over, it's kind of over. So far, she hasn't had an inquiry yet. But
so is that for all of it, Nick? So if you put in a stamp duty claim that you believe is correct, and then 9 months has passed, if they do not question that, then we're okay?
yeah, subject to it not being a fraudulent case. The thing with all the stamp duty stuff is, if you kind of know your way around it, it's incredibly easy to commit widespread fraud. It just the sums are quite big, and the whole thing is quite loose, which is why HMRC get really fussy about things like authorizations, and why why things can slip into what they call a technical team, which is where they do more investigations and so on. So we've got one case where the case is straightforward, but the person behind the case isn't, and it's gone into the technical team, and well, we'll find out what happens then. But
So
on
what
the
do you
whole,
mean the purchaser is a complex case?
the purchaser is complex. I really can't say anything more than that, but it's very interesting how HMRC operate. So the whole trick with all of this, by the way, is to keep it really straightforward. But we could talk about we can talk about, there are two buckets really. One is where you've paid stamp duty and you want to get it back because you've overpaid it, and there are various circumstances in which you can do that. And the other is you're going to buy something and you believe that it justifies being assessed as non-residential, and therefore you're avoiding paying the tax, and you got all of that stuff. So that's a bucket. So there are two buckets, and we can break that down and talk about each one.
Yeah, great. I mean,
that helps.
We have got a question here, but for some reason my computer is, oh, there we go. Here we go. So yeah, so Bobby is talking through. Are you okay to look at this question now? Because it kind of sounds like it relates. So it says, can I claim stamp duty on some properties I bought some years ago? One with a tenant in and the other empty. The tenant had to be moved out due to the house being in poor state of repair. Once we started the work, it was clear the works were more involved and needed so much more doing, to the point where it was stripped back to bare brick. The property has been empty for a number of years and is currently zero banded on council tax with the VOA.
Ooh, that sounds really painful. I hate properties like that. One of the reasons I set up my sourcing business. But anyway, just, because bad properties are traps. But anyway, that aside, so all right, this touches on a number of questions. So the core principle, remember this idea of first principles, always start with that, and then you work your way up. So the first principles with stamp duty are self-assessed tax. In other words, you're declaring to HMRC, Welsh Revenue Authority, Scottish Revenue Scotland, whatever, that here are the circumstances, and then you elect to pay a certain amount of money. There's this idea of effective date of transaction, which is the moment the tax is paid, and there's this other idea that tax liability isn't based on some predictive outcome. Well, there are variables to this in stamp duty, but broadly speaking, you can say that the law, predominantly in stamp duty legislation and the others as well, predominantly it's saying what is the property at the time you purchase it. And so you could buy a property today and sell it in 5 minutes after you pay the stamp. Just do a quick flip. That's all okay, because what we care about, or what is important, is your liability, the circumstances at the effective date of transaction, and that's it. So whether you got a tenant or not, it's immaterial, because when we right, the next bit is, why would you reclaim stamp duty? Well, broadly, there are two buckets. I like the idea of buckets, because a bucket it's a container. So you have a container of things in it. And one would be, the big one is property condition at time of purchase, and the other one is stamp duty reliefs that haven't been obtained. So that previous, and within stamp duty reliefs, you've got two elements really. One is not a relief; it's a classification. So let's say mixed use we talked about, and property condition. They're really related to stamp duty classifications. Now, when it comes to classification of property in England and Northern Ireland, you've got 4 years from date of effective transaction to address a mistake, because that's technically what you're doing. So someone made a mistake. My conveyancing lawyer made a mistake. He said it was residential for stamp duty purposes, bearing in mind that this is for stamp duty purposes, not for mortgage purposes, not for local authority purposes, just stamp duty. So anyway, yeah, and there's been a mistake, and therefore I want this sorted. I want to fix this, and thus I'm submitting my argument to you, dear HMRC. So that's that. And then the other one is misclassification based on whether there's non-residential in the property, like the case with the marina and the house, but predominantly it's condition. So yeah, first thing, you got 4 years.
Sorry, so just to understand, so the stamp duty relief, you've got one is classification.
No,
then...
so right. So when we talk about reliefs, this is where it gets a bit ambiguous, but for the purposes of trying to be simple,
there's nothing simple about stamp duty.
I know. This is what I kind of concluded after I got to about 1,000, 800 pages of this thing, and I realized, oh my God, there are reliefs which are things, basically discounts, I'll call it, prescribed in law. And a stamp duty relief might have been multiple dwellings relief, which was abolished in England, but still available in Scotland and Wales. And that's where, you buy more than one property, they average out the price of the property, and then you pay the stamp duty based on property A, value of property A and value of property B, add the two up together, got yourself a stamp duty liability, a reduced one, versus adding them together, and then you're paying for the stamp duty based on the total sum. So within stamp duty reliefs, there are all sorts of ones like reliefs for property traders, reliefs for Sharia banks, and so on. But that's stamp duty reliefs. And then the other one is classification of property. So it can either be residential, non-residential, or mixed use, which is non-residential legally. And that broadly, that's the two classifications. So I tend not to talk about stamp duty relief when it comes to reclassification. I talk about claim, like it's a claim for overpaid stamp duty. But if it was multiple dwellings, or what's another one? Another one might be, for example, you purchase more than 6 properties, therefore you get a relief because it's classified as non-residential. So in other words, prescribed discounts, I'll call it. Classification, not a prescribed discount. Right, so that's that. So then the next thing that's really back on the property condition theme, there's this idea that if a property is legally restricted from use, or could be legally restricted from use, then it shouldn't be assessed as residential, shouldn't be classified as residential. So a good example is that office building that you might have been in or work in or whatever. It's technically classified as an office, not as a house. So legally it's restricted from being a residential property right now, unless it's converted into one or whatever. So then if you think about a house, let's say, and it's got all these condition issues, then the question is, are they hazardous? And if they are, then, for example, if a local authority came along and did an assessment on the property. So, for example, the person asking the question about the tenant, and I had a tenant and they had to move out. Well, had that tenant called the local authority and said, this place is dangerous, I don't want to be here, and they had done an HHSRS, which is housing health and safety rating system survey, and they found category 1 hazards, they could have issued a prohibition notice on the property. And if they did that, property would be legally restricted from use as a residential property. So this idea of legally, so the foundation of these cases with habitability is based on a couple of elements. One is, could the property ever be used as a residence ever again, a dwelling? For example, does it have such endemic issues like asbestos or serious structural issues, so the whole thing could collapse? Well, if it never could be, well, then you could say it'll never be a dwelling again, therefore non-residential at the time of purchase. But the other one is the legally restricted from use. And in HMRC guidance, they actually talk about this, but in a very kind of oblique way. And they talk a lot about property being structurally, hazardous and what have you. But the big one is legally restricted from use. And what they actually say is that if a local authority had cause to issue a prohibition notice, then they would accept that as non-residential for stamp duty purposes. In other words, what they're actually saying is legally restricted from use, if it was. And this is really big. So when we do a reclaim, what we concentrate on is hazardous condition issues, because if we can show, based on the evidence we've been given, that that property, had it been inspected by local authority, doesn't have to have been, but had it been, had it had an HHSRS inspection, and had that inspection occurred, and there were category 1 hazards, we'll talk about what that is in a minute, then property would have been legally restricted from use. Thus, it's acceptable to say that it wouldn't be assessed as residential for stamp duty purposes. So when we say our reclaims are compliant with HMRC guidance, this is why. Because we use this whole framework, the HHSRS framework, for assessing condition issues. Plus, we ask in the right way. We cite the relevant legislation, and HMRC know us, which is probably a good thing. I don't know. I think it's a good thing because we're very rigorous about this kind of stuff. So anyway, right, what are the condition issues? They are, for instance, toxic mold, classic. Damp, lots of it around in this country. It could be dangerous electrics. So if you can imagine that typical buy-to-let purchase, it's going, say 25% of these properties are like this, where it's a property, maybe it's a probate property, something like that. Excuse me. And it hasn't been modernized in 35 years. So it's got substandard electrics. It's got substandard heating. There's toxic, there's mold around the place. There's damp, penetrating damp. There are slates coming off the roof. The chimney stack is, the pointing's gone on the chimney stack. So that could be a catastrophic failure. On it goes. There could be single glazing on the rear. That's typical. There could be pestilence, like rats and things around the house, and mice and what have you. All of these are hazards that could affect the health, safety, and mental well-being of the occupant in a very serious way. And so a good way of thinking about it is, could you rent that property out? Yes. Okay, I don't know if you got a case. No, you got a case. Okay. Assuming your judgment is sensible.
Yeah. So Bob has said, so he just told me that I know who it is now. So yeah, Bob, I've mentored him in the past, and this is actually a property that we spoke about, but he purchased it in 2019, so it's now over 4 years. Yeah. So that sounds like he's now not able to do anything about that one, even though it sounds like he would have had very good reasoning from following, if he were to go back and look at the HHSRS and whether it would have failed an inspection, that he potentially could have got a reclaim, but because it's now over 4 years, he potentially can't. Is that
correct? So just on the 4-year thing, the 4-year question, why is it 4 years? Because it's mandated in law. So the Finance Act 2003 has a whole section about stamp duty, and if you're able to rummage around the legislation, you'll find the 4-year timeline. Now, in theory, you could say extenuating circumstances, etc. But if you look at the first-tier tax tribunal rulings on various things, then and the way it works is you've got legislation, and then you've got interpretation of legislation. Where the interpretation is a bit fuzzy, like what is the meaning of a dwelling, is actually not that clear, believe it or not. There's some debate over that. Where you have an argument, where you have a question, you sometimes end up with a court case, and in the court case, various principles are agreed, and one takes those principles and then applies those to judgments on whatever is related to this. So, for example, there have been a number of cases with stamp duty reliefs that have not been uptaken. Oh, I don't know what the right word, but haven't been benefited. So people haven't claimed reliefs in time. Classic multiple dwellings relief, it's 12 months, hard line. And so in a number of cases, what they're saying is ignorance is not an answer. So ignorance is not an excuse. So you can't say, I didn't know about it and it's outside the 4 years, therefore I want to reclaim. It won't wash. So annoyingly, the 4-year reclaim line is hard. But in Scotland, it's 5 years. Okay. I think in Wales, it's 4 years. So...
Okay. And so then Qasim has said, so how do I get the stamp duty back? So he definitely purchased a property that was uninhabitable. So it sounds like it fits into this HHSRS, having a category 1 hazard.
Yeah.
So what would then be the process to be able to claim that back?
Okay. Well, the first thing I'd say is HMRC block by bureaucracy. So bear that in mind when I explain what I'm about to explain. So the first thing is that there are various reclaims businesses around, and none of them will be very forthcoming about how this works, but I'll explain the best I can. Broadly, the answer is have a go if you really want, or talk to me. Emma and I work together on these things as well because I'm helping her out with her stuff. So, just ping Emma, we can get a conversation going, whatever. But broadly, the way it works is you start with the law. So you've got to cite the relevant parts of the Finance Act 2003, and I think it's Schedule 10, and I don't remember the paragraph offhand, but you've got to cite the relevant legislation because HMRC are mandated to follow the law. And unless you say which law you're talking about, then they're not going to respond because they block by bureaucracy. So the next thing is you've got to give them instructions and tell them what you want because you get the rest of it. Right. Because if you don't, if you're not explicit about it, then it's almost like talking to a computer. If you don't give it precise instructions, it's not going to do what you want it to do. Unless it's artificial intelligence. But let's not assume too much. I mean, the HMRC people are great on the whole. They're very sensible, but it's a big monolith and there's a lot of procedure. And if things kind of step out of kilter on procedure, then cases just get bogged down. Things don't happen. So anyway, the next thing is giving them instructions. So you tell them, I want you to change the SDLT 1 from residential to non-residential. Go and look at the SDLT 1 guidance. You'll see it's question 6 or whatever. I don't remember offhand. Then what else? Then we got the case argument. So then you should cite PN Bewley, VHMRC, because there was a reason you're making a claim, because you heard about this case, which set a precedent and set an argument, which is, if not habitable, not residential. And then you would then talk about all of the condition issues that justify the case. Now, the thing about HMRC is they work on a pay now, check later basis. And because it's a self-assessed tax, as long as you've got a statement of truth in the document, in other words, you say, I'm telling the truth, statement of truth, standard thing, you can do a search for it, then they'll accept that, and then they'll just pay the stamp duty. And by the way, what they're paying is the difference between residential rates and non-residential rates of stamp duty. So either if you're a property investor or you've paid the higher rate stamp duty, whether you're an individual or an investor, makes no difference. The economic justification for this is that the stamp duty you paid is higher than non-residential rates. And if you're an owner-occupier, then all of this starts to make sense once the property is valued over £1 million, by the way, because non-residential rates become increasingly lower as the price goes up. So when you're in the £10 million range, you're talking £500,000 or whatever it is. We have calculators on the website. But anyway, the next thing is, you've got to ask for what you want back. And then the next thing would be to put your arguments forth. And the reason you would do this, by the way, is because you've got 9 months in which HMRC can inquire. And if they believe you don't have much of an argument, then they'll inquire, because they'll go, well, why did you do this? So having a strong case means having a low risk of them coming back at you. Touch wood. Here's some wood. Touch wood. We've never had a clawback to date. We've never had an inquiry. Touch wood. Not to say we never will, but so far so good. And I put that down to us being quite fussy about the standard of case we put forth. But anyway, what's next? So then, well, what we do is we have a list of 3,200 condition issues based on the HHSRS legislation. So it's 29 core condition issues like damp, entrapment, cold, excessive heat, etc. And then we've extrapolated this to produce this big long list. And then what we do is, I'm not saying that's what you would do if you're doing this as a DIY thing, but I'm just telling you what we do. We then go through with 3 people on the case team, and they'll pick up a case, and then they're led by a guy who's a qualified surveyor, which helps. So, and all the team have been working with me since the property sourcing days. So we all know what property condition issues look like. And then what happens is, as they see different condition issues, they match them up against the master list. And then we have five ratings, from really serious down to pay some, take note. If it's really serious, we say it is a category 1 hazard. If it's a 4-star, we say it's probably category 1, 3-star category 2, 2-star probably category 2, 1-star, just be aware. And then typically what we end up with is, say, 15, 20 different condition issues, because they're going to be random things like that plug socket being loose, which is an electrical hazard, the out-of-date the out-of-date consumer unit, the old gas fire, the worn carpet. And what we're doing is we're aggregating all these issues. So if you think of it like a point scoring system, you start with 100 points gets you over the line. You've got a viable case, and any more than that's even better. And so it's effectively like that. We're just tallying up the number of issues. And if we get over 100, we know we got our case. And so if you're DIYing this, my advice is read up on the HHSRS legislation. There's lots of guidance out there. Look for the condition issues that you've got. State that I got this, this, and this is a category 1 hazard. Make sure you got photographs to back it up, and away you go. So then you send it off, but remembering that HMRC will be objective with your case, because they are, and they'll either pay or they won't. And if they don't pay, we'll have another go. There's nothing in the law that says you can't attempt to reclaim like 1,000 times, but it's just a lot of messing around and hassle. So the typical turnaround time for us is 14 working days.
Okay.
But if it's a poorly constructed case and it ends up with technical team, it's about 2 months, maybe a bit more. And I know I'm kind of pitching us saying, use us, use anyone, whatever, have a go yourself, sure.
And
But
presumably you then
whatever.
take a percentage of the reclaim, or is it just a
so percentages, the advertised sum is 30% plus VAT. So in other words, you got the reclaim and the advertised amount is 30% plus VAT. But for example, we work with people like Emma, and Emma knows what she's doing. And to save us time, and just because we've got a lot of inbound cases these days, if you had a conversation with Emma, Emma knows what she's talking about. And if, for example, it came through her, well, it would be 25% plus VAT. And the way it works is it's no win, no fee. By the way, I'll just say this. This is typical. This is what you should expect from anyone in this sector. So you go shopping. What you should expect is no win, no fee, just like us. That if they claw back, if HMRC claw back, then they'll repay their fees back to you. And the other big one is that when they pay, they should pay you directly like we do. That's really important. Now, some of the reclaims businesses don't do that, which I think is really suspect. But because we're dealing with quite a lot of money, I've always felt that it's your money, not our money. And if we do a good job, you pay us. And if you don't, you'll contest the invoice. But the evidence is in the payment, basically. And so, it's just that the reclaims business would pay you directly, then they get paid. And also it just means less scrutiny from HMRC, because we don't want to take in all that money. I mean, we've reclaimed millions of pounds now, and it's just, I don't want your money in our account. I want our fees
of
in
course,
our account.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
So just to clarify this, sorry. So you basically, and I'm sorry if this sounds really simple, but you hopefully understand the, for instance, the HHSRS categories and what the hazards are and all of those kind of things. So you could up front prove that it has issue conditions.
So we can talk about that. Yeah, that's another story. So there's two buckets, more buckets, lots of buckets everywhere.
Or two, it's the reclaim, which is what we've just been speaking at. So if, like Bob, you've bought something and, you realize that it's much worse than you'd anticipated, and it's within 4 years, then you can claim it back.
Yeah. So the other scenario, which is easier but higher risk, is where you're about to buy something and the place is a wreck, and you document it. So what you can do is and this is all in my book, by the way, what you can do is, depending on the value of the property. So I had a guy the other day, he's buying something for about 2 million. And this takes us into the world of advice. And I technically, I don't really, we probably will end up offering professional advice, but not for now. But anyway, the idea, there are companies that'll do this. They'll take a percentage. So in other words, they'll help you self-assess as non-residential at purchase, and they'll take a fee like 15% or something. And then if it gets queried, they'll defend your case because their fees are on the line. And I think we will probably get into all of this kind of thing, but not right now. But anyway, this guy, £2 million. So obviously quite a lot of money at stake here. Well, like 100 for him, 120, 130 grand. So, counts. At that level, what I said to him was, read my book. So I gave him a draft copy of the book. Be very clear about your instructions with your conveyancing solicitor. Make sure that you explicitly accept liability for this so that they're off the hook. Then get an HHSRS inspection done so that you can have third-party evidence demonstrating that there are Category 1 hazards in the property. An HHSRS inspection, they're not that easy to get sorted out because there aren't that many inspectors around, believe it or not. It's not like a normal survey. But a RIC survey is a different thing, and it's looking for different issues. But it's just, if you're going to be tight on this thing, so you do an HHSRS inspection, you document the property thoroughly, and then if you're really being careful, you put a case together just arguing on the basis of P and Bewley and so on. So that's kind of going all the way with it. So where I want to get with all of this is that someone rocks up and says, look, I got this house and it's a mess, etc. And then I know which inspectors to book. We book them in, we get the photography done, we put the case file together, we instruct the solicitor, we say, do this. Client has everything they need, and off they go. They've got HMRC of 9 months in which to inquire. Once that's over, it's over. But the issue I have with all of this is it is at one level, it is tax avoidance. And that always makes me unsettled. And funnily enough, I've been working on this over the weekend, the compliance section in my book. It's very difficult. The issue is whether one's involved in a scheme. So in other words, a structured way of avoiding tax. And so if, for example, HMRC thought, okay, this guy Nick is preaching this thing about self-assessing as non-residential at purchase. Bearing in mind, a lot of people do this. Is he promoting a scheme? If he's promoting a scheme, then suddenly you're in the world of tax avoidance law, and that's really quite scary. One of the reasons I've kind of stayed away from this, but there are businesses like Cornerstone Tax who are kind of at the top of the heap with this kind of thing. They do high net worth, like valuable properties, and they will do this kind of thing, and they're in an okay position. So I think it's okay, but one has to be very clear that this is not a scheme. This is it is an application of your rights under the law.
Yeah, I mean, that seems, I'm very aware of time, but that seems very strange. It's not a scheme, it's facts, isn't it? If you fall into this factual realm that the property is hazardous for this many reasons, I can't see that it would be a scheme, but you just have to be very careful.
It just creeps me out a little bit, to use a phrase. But anyway, okay, so going back to that property, my suggestion is be very very clear about the condition, like how bad the property is. If the place is a wreck and you bought it, then okay, fair enough. Maybe assess as non-residential. I think the problem is it's a big topic, and unless you have a general idea of how to navigate this, then a lot of what I'm saying is just going to be words, if that makes sense.
But basically, what you're saying is much to be on the safe side, as much as, you might, give away some of the money you save, it's much better to be protected by them than not, so to speak.
Okay, so just putting it in simple terms, if you have a property and it's an absolute wreck and you're confident it falls within guidance, HMRC guidance, then self-assess as non-residential. If, on the other hand, you're not quite sure, then pay the stamp duty reclaim later, because therefore technically it's not avoidance, it's not tax avoidance. So that's that. Is there anything? Have you any other questions, as it were? Because I feel like I've talked in sort of quite abstract terms about a lot of stuff, and maybe that's not very helpful for people. I don't know.
No, I think it was very helpful. I mean, inherently, what we've been really honing in on is this element of really understanding, because I think most of us have believed that to not pay stamp duty requires there to be like no kitchen, no loo. But
Yeah.
actually, there are more very specific things that if you actually do a little bit of research, that a property may fall into these various things, like you gave damp, cold, excess
Yeah.
heat, rat infestation, all of these kind of things that we may consider to be a temporary issue, but that would make it non-inhabitable at that moment. And
Yeah.
that's the most important thing, isn't it? It's on purchase, there may be people living in it like there were with Bob, but that's not appropriate for them to be living in it.
Yes.
So it's, I think, what you offer, and which is what I really like, and I just think stamp duty is incredible. And I was just so surprised when I understood that it's a personal responsibility, but two, there are so many ways of not paying it. And as you say, well, I think you mentioned a figure of, I can't remember, but it was in that 1.7
7
billion
billion. Yeah.
potential overpayment. I mean, that's crackers. I mean, as much as you don't mind paying the right taxes, obviously we would prefer not to, but I think it's appropriate to pay the right taxes. But when you're massively overpaying, so for instance, I know for a fact that my parents, this current property that they live in, they way overpaid, and that really annoys me. Because there's nothing I can do. It was years ago. It was just before my journey. But again, that is annoying. So now going forward, I don't want to be making those mistakes again. I want to be ensuring that as much as I can with my little brain, I can get these things done. So no, I think what you've covered has been really great.
So there's a couple of things. So someone's just asked about a RIC survey. Would a RIC survey, kind of, because it's a third party, a RIC survey will do to some extent, because it's a third party professional assessing the property. They might do, generally from what I know, RIC surveyors tend not to do HHSRS because it's a different discipline. And there, on our website, Stamp Duty Advice Bureau, there's a whole section about HHSRS and what it means, and what you should look for. I think on the whole, the thing with stamp duty is it's a bit like life insurance or anything that's just not pleasant, and you just don't want to think about it until it's a problem. So I think the most important thing from this conversation is that that you can do various things about it if you're informed. There are people who can help you if you look, and the biggest one is this property condition thing, and the basis of that is legally restricted from use. And if you remember that key principle and you apply it to your property and you ask yourself, would that have been legally restricted from use? Either A, just to be inhabited because hazards, condition hazards, but the other one is if it's a buy to let or an HMO or anything like that, its purpose is to be let out. And under the Homes Fitness for Habitation Act 2018, if it isn't of a decent standard, then it can't be let out. So therefore it's restricted from use as a letting as well. So as a dwelling, it's legally restricted. So there's lots of variables to this. Okay, there we are.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much. We have run over a little bit, but it is such an incredibly massive topic. And as you say, it is really complex. And, I can go sort of 6 months and not be thinking about a certain element. And then I start doubting myself because it really, there's so many things going on. So I really like to constantly, have the top up. And that's why I'm really enjoying sort of, chatting with you and working with you and helping people to, as I say, not make these massive contributions when they're not supposed to be. We pay when we need to pay, but we mustn't. So yeah, I really, really appreciate your time here, Nick. So just please, could you repeat where people can find you? Obviously, we will put some notes out as well underneath so people can contact you. But where's the main place where people can come and find you?
Stamp Duty Advice Bureau. Like Citizens Advice, Stamp Duty Advice Bureau. That's the best place. We've got loads of information there.
Brilliant, brilliant. Okay, so that's fantastic. Great, guys. Well, look, thank you so much for being here. And yes, and next week, I believe I have got Paul Merrick. I've interviewed Paul a few times before, so it'd be great to come and see us next week. And also, I believe tomorrow I have got my interview with Lee all about property mindset, because we do know, and in fact Nick has touched on this a number of times, how important mindset is. So we'll touch on that. So again, Nick, really, really appreciate your time here today and sharing so much, and cannot wait for your enormous book that, you know, will be, it sounds like a doorstop as well as a knowledge access, because it's going to be very big. But we really appreciate that. So yes, again, thank you so much, Nick, and yeah, take care and see you very soon.